Good evening. Welcome you all to the 27th lecture in the Democracy Dialogue series, organized by New Socialist Initiative, an ideological political platform. This is Subhash Gatade. The Democracy Dialogue series, as many of you know, was initiated during the pandemic, and leading scholars, activists, politicians, and public intellectuals have spared their valuable time with us and tried to address the key concern behind this series. Basically, it is the urge to understand the paradox that how did India, independent India, which started with Nehru, has landed up with Narendra Modi, a society less educated, less developed, gave rise to great leaders and a constitution which offered prospects of an enlightened democracy, and with well-educated, with people better fed, better educated, and with democracy further entrenched, we have threat of majoritarian authoritarianism and a bigoted fascistic leadership. We are extremely thankful to Mr. Manishankar Iyer Saab, former union minister, author of many books, and regular social commentator, for agreeing to deliver this 27th lecture. This evening, he will be enlightening us about the leaching of constitutional democracy. Iyer Saab has authored many books, Memoirs of a Maverick, which has appeared very recently, A Time of Transition, Rajiv Gandhi to 21st Century, Nikkarwala's Silbillies and Other Curious Creatures, and Confessions of a Secular Fundamentalist. What one admires about Manishankar Saab is the frankness with which he is ready to point out weaknesses of the secular camp and his unsparing criticism of the communal fascist forces. We are sure that this evening we are in for a deep and thought-provoking presentation. Friends, please welcome Manishankar Iyer Saab. Please, sir.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. May I begin by thanking Subhash Bhai and his colleagues for honoring me with this invitation to deliver the 27th lecture of the series. I think I should begin by explaining the meaning of the title I've given to my lecture, which is Leaching, the Leaching of Constitutional Democracy. I think all of us are familiar with the word absorption, the way in which a sponge picks up any liquid, such as water. It's a process by which water moves from whichever surface it is on into the sponge. It's a long process, and very often there are signs of the liquid still left on the table, even after the sponge has been applied. Leaching is the opposite of absorption. It leaches out. So if water, when you pick up a sponge and press it, and the water that has been absorbed comes out, that is the process that is called leaching. So what I'm going to argue tonight is that there is democracy written into our constitution. But like a sponge being pressed, there is a leaching of the spirit of constitutionalism that has been taking place, sometimes covertly, but with increasing boldness, overtly, from the Constitution. The Constitution itself is being celebrated. And the 26th of November, which in 1949 was the day on which the Constitution was adopted, has been celebrated by the current government as Constitution Day. But it is easy to observe these anniversaries. It's more difficult to be true to the spirit of the original document. And it's Fali Nariman who in his recent book, has drawn attention to the spirit of constitutionalism. And it is that spirit that is being leached by various actions. But let me begin by first saying that that does not mean we don't have a constitution. It does not mean that as we end the year 2023, India is not a democracy. India is both a democracy and has a constitution, and therefore can be correctly described as a constitutional democracy. And to underline the obvious, let me say that we have elections. We've had them very regularly, except when political circumstances have obliged Parliament to be closed earlier, or in one case, to be extended. That was at the time of the emergency. But the Parliament exists, our assemblies exist. What is remarkable is that election results are accepted. There have been several governments in the last 75 years, but none of them has come by use of force. They've come through the ballot box, not through the bullet. And the ruling power has peacefully conceded its seat of power to the party that opposed it and succeeded in getting the approval of the people through the formula envisaged in the Constitution. Above all, we have a disciplined army. If you look to our neighborhood, most of all Pakistan, but also Myanmar, there is a tendency for the armed forces in those countries to take over power whenever they view a political vacuum. But in our country, although there have been some very short-lived governments, such as the government of Chandrasekhar, the government of VP Singh, the first two governments of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the fact is that no armed forces commander attempted to take advantage of political stability to bring in the military as a political force. And this is so unusual as to be commended. Constitutional democracy has been accepted by the man with the gun. Now, that's a remarkable achievement. We have state assemblies and even panchayats, and the Constitution governs the ambit of each of these levels of government. So there have not been too many overt clashes between the different levels of government. There have been differences of opinion. There is certainly very considerable concern now over whether federalism is being reduced. But the fact of the matter is that by and large, the central government appears to know what its ambit is. The state governments know what their ambit is. And inshallah, the panchayats will be empowered according to the spirit of the Constitution. There are one or two states in which considerable progress has been made. I would particularly commend the examples of Kerala and Karnataka. But as the former Minister of Panchayati Raj, I would assert that in every state there has been progress in implementing Panchayati Raj, even though the pace of implementation and the depth of sincerity displayed has varied from state to state. I would say that as of today, the best legislation is in Karnataka, the best actual implementation is in Kerala, and perhaps the biggest laggard is Uttar Pradesh. But all the other states of India fall largely in the middle category that is doing well, and a few of them fall in the category that is closer to Uttar Pradesh's example. So in these circumstances, we have a vibrant democracy. Moreover, we have an independent judiciary. It extends all the way from the magistrates' court to the Supreme Court. And I would stress that we also have an election commission that is supervising elections, and we have a comptroller and auditor general who is often, sometimes unfairly, but often very stringent in his examination of the accounts of the government of not only India, the governments of the states, as even to some extent the accounts of the panchayats. So if you look at the structure, the constitutional structure of democracy, by and large, it has been preserved. So why do we come up with this strange question of the leeching of constitutional democracy? Well, I would say, I need to make one more point, which I should have made earlier, that we have a written constitution, the longest constitution that has been devised by the human mind anywhere in the world, and it has lasted for the better part of 76 years. You know, the average age of a constitution, of a written constitution, is 16 years. So it's an amazing achievement that even this government swears by the Constitution. Moreover, why is it that we think secular constitutional democracy is at a crossroads just now? What is it that makes us wonder whether constitutionalism is being leached from our constitutional democracy? Why is it that I have chosen this particular subject for my lecture today? Well, the reason essentially is that Dr. Ambedkar, on the 26th of November, 1949, warned that a written constitution is only as good as those who implement it. And if there is malified intention, then whatever are the written provisions of the Constitution, it's possible to suborn those provisions. And when Fali Nariman talks about the spirit of constitutionalism, and we look at what is happening around us, has been happening for the past 9 years, and episodically happened earlier, here it's happening systemically, there is cause for worry. Because if the water moves out of the sponge, then the water will not remain in the sponge. So in the same way, if there is a leaching of the spirit of constitutionalism, even if we have a written document before us, it does not answer, are we worried as much as we are today? Because I don't think I'd have been invited to deliver this 27th lecture if it hadn't been for the fact that all of us on this panel are concerned that the spirit of constitutionalism is being leached. That is why we've gathered today. And it seems to me that this is because the balance given in the Constitution between the authority of the executive, the role of the legislature, and the functioning of the judiciary, all of which act as constraints on each other, that is been disappearing slowly over the last 9 years, particularly. The balance in the Constitution, does it exist? Let me give an example straight away. I'd put myself in difficulty in consequence. We have the recent judgment of the Supreme Court on Article 370. It's a technical judgment. It deals with whether the government of the time, on the 5th of August 2019, had or did not possess the constitutional right to do what it did. And it has answered that question by saying that on the basis of a certain interpretation of the constitutional provisions, it can be said that the government was within its rights to abrogate Article 370. But it did not go into the question, perhaps because it shouldn't, but anyway, it did not go into the question of whether 370 should have been removed or not. That is the moral question. That is the constitutional question. That is the political question. It doesn't matter whether the Constitution can be interpreted in such a manner as to authorize the central government to first do away with the state assembly and then put its own representative as the voice of the people of Kashmir, use that voice as the excuse for issuing constitutional orders through the president, two of them, to open the way towards reading the court judgment has said, is that those are all right. That has been observed. But they have not answered the question because perhaps it wasn't agitated before them, and perhaps because the court is not the right place to agitate the question as to whether this needed to be done. Should it have been done? Should it have been accompanied by splitting the state into two, by putting both the parts, removing their statehood and making them union territories, and leaving the governor, the lieutenant governor, now as a quite independent authority who does not need to consult the people before coming to any kind of judgment. These questions have not been answered. And so one feels that if the judiciary decides to limit itself to textual questions, then perhaps it needs to think about what its role should be. I have read in a book by Parakala Prabhakar that it is necessary for ensure the integrity of the democratic process. Go beyond textual obsession to engage with and ensure the integrity of the democratic process. It is the integrity of the democratic process that was in question over Article 370. The subordinate question was whether the government had the right to do so. The Supreme Court has answered the subordinate question and has not addressed itself to the main question. So therefore, the people of Kashmir have to be asked whether they think that it is time the provision was removed, that this is surrendered to the Lieutenant Governor, who's an outsider in the sense that he's not from Jammu and Kashmir, all in the name of further integrating Kashmir with the rest of the Indian Union. And the overwhelming question is, has this succeeded in what Jawaharlal Nehru used to call the emotional integration of Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of India? Or do they feel alienated from the constitutional process which guarantees the secular and democratic nature of our state? And there, I think, if the courts believe that it is not their domain to answer this question, it is necessary for the legislature to do so. But how can a legislature function when the presiding officers are not like Caesar's wife? Caesar's wife is not only supposed to be virtuous, but should be seen as being virtuous. And that seems to be absent or getting increasingly absent. I underline words, seems to be getting increasingly absent in the functioning of the presiding officers. And the instant case that comes to one's mind is that a BJP member called Ramesh Beduri made the most objectionable, the most obscene remarks about a fellow member. That fellow member, who happens to belong to the minority, has taken his case before the Ethics Committee. But the Ethics Committee has still not taken up that issue. And instead, because Mr. Danish Ali is a member of the Ethics Committee, they have scored his behavior in the meetings. So Danish Ali ends up without getting justice in his own case and being inflicted with condemnatory words in the case with which he's not associated, except as a member of the Ethics Committee. It's also amazing that the Ethics Committee should have recommended the expulsion of a member when it is the job of the Privileges Committee to do so. And that instead of answering the question as to whether the Ethics Committee had exceeded the bounds of its propriety by demanding the expulsion of the member in question, the Parliament just went through the motions of passing a resolution expelling this member. Now, they've probably done this member quite a favor, because the first thing that the leader of her party has done is to say that she's going to be the candidate for the next election. And the next election is due in a few months, and she would merely be out of Parliament for a very few days of the 5 years for which she was elected. But it does raise a question in our mind as to whether the spirit of the Constitution is being observed by the presiding officers. I have been a member of 3 Lok Sabhas, and even if the Speaker of the lower house had been elected on a party basis and had not resigned his or had not left his link with the party that got him elected, even if technically speaking he had resigned his party post, the fact of the matter is that there weren't all these serious questions raised about the behavior of previous speakers, as are now increasingly being raised about the speaker here in Delhi and the speakers in the State Assembly that have been elected by a majority of the BJP members of that particular house. So if the post of the umpire is suspect, can the cricket match be played? That really is the question. Not only that, it's a very important point, but we also see that the voice of the media is being increasingly strangled. I have before me a news report which says that India's ranking in the Press Freedom Index is at 161 of 180 nations. If we are at 161 of 180 nations, democracy with a free media, we find that I think it's time a law was brought in of the kind that was brought in the United States after the stock market crash of 1929, when it was found that beneficiaries of stock market investments were often corporates. So corporate investment in their own firms was stopped by law. So the intrusion of business barons into the media, I think we need in India to somehow ensure that big business does not enter the media to promote its own economic, business, or political interests. Because if you combine the kind of entry of big business into the media with the very, very opaque electoral bond scheme, you find that some of the biggest contributors, or so we guess, because at the moment it's all anonymous, but probably some of the biggest contributors to the electoral bond scheme in favor of the ruling party are the very business barons who are now taking over the media. And you have to only talk privately to media people to discover the extent to which ownership is increasingly determining the view of that particular medium. Now, that is what I call the leaching of the spirit of constitutionalism from our constitutional democracy. Also, I find that civil society, think tanks, are being increasingly targeted on a completely bogus basis as to why are they getting so much money from outside. Well, they're getting so much money from outside because the law permitted it. And we thought that institutions like the Ford Foundation are philanthropic institutions and do not act as arms of their respective government. So there was permission given for these people to receive money from abroad. Then came the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, and certain are obeyed. The origin now, civil society's voice is sought to be strangled by cutting them off from sources of friends abroad. And when the government does that, private donors in India also withdraw their funding. And the government itself, of course, withdraws its funding from targeted organizations. So you bankrupt the think tank, or you bankrupt the civil society organization as the way of shutting its mouth. Now, according to the law, you can register any society under the Registration of Societies Act. But if there is a targeting, because what your work involves criticizing the government, then it means that you're saying that civil society should form, that civil society should either shape up or shape out. Now, this is the one way of really strangling democracy, because in all democracies, increasingly in the late 20th and 21st century, civil society is getting itself organized. It's not organized in a hegemonic way. It is organized by several different societies operating, all of them registered under the law. I'm talking of NGOs who have been allowed to come into existence after revealing how they are being funded. And the mere fact that the funds are largely from abroad has never been an objection so long as the FCRA provision is observed. Now, this FCRA was amended a couple of years ago, and the conditions were made more stringent. And I agree that an amended law needs to be conformed with. But if you take up instances of funding that come before these restrictions were brought in, and then persecute them through state agencies like the Enforcement Directorate, the Income Tax, the CBI, and so forth, then what happens is that the punishment becomes the process. It doesn't matter if the courts eventually come along and say, that's wrong, that's the wrong thing to do. If in the meanwhile, they've been incarcerated, particularly under laws that are very, very stringent and used indiscriminately, then the voice is shut before it can even speak, and justice is denied even before the process of justice begins. So it's a very subtle way of ensuring that the media on the one hand, civil society on the other, including think tanks and academic institutions, conform to the thinking of the government. Now, if the thinking of the government is enough to run a democracy, then Mr. Modi can point with pride to the Niti Aayog and say that the National Institute for the Transformation of India, and then he added Ayog because he wanted to show that he is from Bharat, not from India. The Niti Aayog is a think tank. So do you think there should be only one think tank in the country? Should there not be a variety of think tanks that throw up a variety of alternatives before the people of India who constitute the Indian electorate? Over a period of time, they may succeed in persuading people that the policies of the government are wrong. Even more hopefully, in a short period, they may be able to warn the government, the executive, off from taking wrong decisions or walking down the wrong path. But if you strangle them financially, they can't continue operating. And when they can't continue operating, they can't contribute constructively to the processes of democratic thinking, democratic discussion, democratic decision-making. Merely because a party gets 31% of the vote in 2014 and 37% of the vote in 2019 does not make it Zeus, the Greek god of wisdom. It is just a majority party. And democracy is premised on the condition that there is a lively opposition, and that the opposition is not only in the legislatures, but that the people of India have the right to decide that they voted wrongly. That is what anti-incumbency is called. It is the decision of the people that they have made a mistake in voting for X in the last election, and therefore they'll vote for Y in the new election. But all this requires the generation of information and critique from outside the government. The government is not the repository of all wisdom, is the repository of political power, but it's not the repository of all wisdom. And therefore, a robust media, a robust civil society, a robust academia, all these are essential for ensuring that the spirit of constitutionalism is included in the Constitution. So merely having a constitution or celebrating the Constitution Day on the 26th of November or holding a parade on the 26th of January is not constitutional democracy. If the spirit of constitutionalism is taken out, and it is the spirit of constitutionalism that is being leached as a result of the kind of action that is being tolerated and encouraged with respect to capitalist control over the media and the strangulation of effective financing for think tanks and civil society organizations. I would like to once again quote Parakala Prabhakar in this connection, that the idea that to criticize government is to be anti-Modi and therefore anti-national and unpatriotic is a wrong notion. You can be completely patriotic when you criticize the Prime Minister or criticize the government or criticize its policies or criticize it for particular actions taken or not taken. After all, that is what the BJP was doing all these years until they came to power. And they were given the liberty and freedom to do so. But here we find that if there is criticism made by a major member of the opposition, a major member of the opposition, of the rich business barons supporting the Prime Minister, his words are cut out from the parliamentary record. How is this the spirit of the Constitution? That's other people's term in Parliament is suspended on trivial grounds. Is it written anywhere in the Constitution that a lady member cannot have many men friends? And yet that was the course of questioning in the Ethics Committee when the issue was, has she violated any rule which endangers the security of the nation? And when she answered that there are many, many MPs who have to give the login details to their own, giving the question or getting information from somebody is not a crime unless it's established. And in the case of Madam Moitra, I don't think it was established because her guilt was assumed and she was asked to prove her innocence. And prove her innocence in a line of questioning that was, as Perry Mason would have said, incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. So we see that the committees of Parliament are also functioning in a manner that you cannot describe as being in conformity with the spirit of the Constitution. This also applies to much criticism that is now being made of effectively making the Election Commission a puppet of the government, and the treatment meted out to one election commissioner, Sri Lavasa, for having taken a dissident position. So if the Election Commission itself is rendered into a government department, then how can we have free, fair, and just elections? And how can we have a constitutional democracy if you don't have free, fair, and just elections? I mean, the pride of India, as Mr. S.Y. Qureshi keeps tom-tomming around the world, is that we had an election commission that was independent of the government and had little difficulty in pulling up any transgression of the electoral law or the model code of conduct. And it didn't matter whether the candidate concerned was the government's candidate or it was the opposition's candidate. But now, if you convert the Election Commission, if you convert the Central Information Office into a department of the government, instead of giving them the right to come to conclusions independently, how can we preserve the spirit of our Constitution? We also see that in key agencies like the CBI and the ED and the taxes and police, there are extensions being freely given to police officers or to other officers who have been seen to take action according to the executive's wishes. They're not allowed to function as they ought to. We talked of caged parrots at one stage. Now we have caged eagles. We have caged vultures. And the way in which notices are issued, raids are conducted, there is humiliation in even the charges made, there's public disgrace that is resorted to, and even jail, as in the case of Purkayastha, as in the case of Siddiq Kadappan. In the case of Siddiq Kadappan, the man was put in jail for 3 years for no reason other than that he was a Muslim. And at the end, the judicial process said he was innocent and should never have been arrested. But who's going to return 3 years of his life to him? So if the law is supposed to protect the citizen, It is not to be taken in hand by the agencies of the government to harass people, to render them guilty before it has been so pronounced by a court, before the sentence has been pronounced by a court. If you just hold them as under trials in jail, then the process becomes the punishment. And there have been so many cases of the process becoming the punishment that it is difficult to provide a certificate to this government that it is following the spirit of the Constitution. And it's no good saying that Indira Gandhi did the same thing or that Rajiv Gandhi did the same thing. This is what is called whataboutery. If Indira Gandhi did the same thing, well, the democratic process defeated her. If Rajiv Gandhi did the same thing, well, the democratic process defeated him. But that does not give a justification for you to go 20 paces further than either of those, or even Jawaharlal Nehru did. So it is one thing to criticize your predecessors. It's one thing to criticize the opposition for opposing, but it is quite another to punish them through draconian measures when the Constitution provides for due process, either through the committees of Parliament or through the courts of law. And then if you start rewarding people in the courts who are in very high positions for giving judgments that vindicate the government, then it certainly throws into question the validity of the process. When Mr. Ranjan Gogoi becomes a Rajya Sabha member, when Mr. being the Comptroller and Auditor General becomes not only a member of Parliament, but he also becomes a governor and then becomes the chairman of the IIPA for life, well, certain ethical questions do arise. And the spirit of the Constitution is not connected with the letter of the law. It is connected with the spirit of constitutionalism. And if this is not understood, then merely by getting courts to technically clear your compatibility with the letter of the law amounts to leaching the Constitution of its spirit. That is why I don't hold that the Constitution of India has ceased to operate. I'm saying that the spirit of constitutionalism is being leached, and therefore the Constitution is operating in an increasing moral vacuum. That people like Professor Stan Swamy, they're literally driven to death when the case is not decided against them. And the courts are also either overburdened or in some cases, they seem to delight in delaying matters. I'll give you an example from the past. On the Shah Bano case, Rajiv Gandhi's government passed the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986 in May 1986. In September 1986, Daniel Latifi, a well-known jurist, filed a case against that act. But when did the court give its judgment? It took 15 years for the Supreme Court to consider Daniel Latif's petition. And then it said that Daniel Latifi's petition was wrongly based on everything, and that the Muslim Women's Act did not reverse the Supreme Court judgment of 1985, but in fact implemented it in a manner which enabled all the parties concerned to accept that decision. And for the last 22 years, all divorce cases for Muslim women are being decided under the 1986 Act, whose constitutionalism and legalism was challenged by none other than Daniel Latifi. So if you take so long to decide this issue, how can justice be rendered? You take the other example of Bofors. It was because of the charges made on Bofors that Rajiv Gandhi fell from having the largest number of seats in the Lok Sabha ever to having the largest loss of seats ever in 1989. The case went through the courts. And in 2004, the Supreme Court, the High Court of Delhi, under Justice J.D. Kapoor, said that there was not a scintilla of evidence against Rajiv Gandhi or S.K. Bhatnagar. And then there were other parts of the case. I don't want to go into the technicalities. But in 2005, Justice R.S. Sodhi of the Delhi High Court, he reiterated this judgment, saying that public officials were not involved and that the payments made by Bofors were in settlement of contractual obligations that had to be abrogated because of the insistence that there should be no middleman. But what is the point of a judgment in 2004 on a case that started how many years earlier? 18 years earlier. This is a classic case of justice delayed being justice denied. And I've already brought up what happened on Article 370, that the action was taken in August 2019, and the Supreme Court's view on it has come for more than 4 years later and deals with legal technicalities, but eschews the moral dimension or the political imperative. The question of electoral bonds. And when you see that there are 5,000 crore rupees collected, of which 3,000 crore have gone to a particular party, which happens to be the ruling party, there are serious questions that arise. And one would have imagined that whatever other business there is before the Supreme Court, they would act on this question as a matter of priority. But if priorities are going to conform to government priorities and not the priorities of justice, then serious questions arise about whether the judiciary itself is conforming to the spirit of the Constitution. We've had remarkable chief justices in the past who had no difficulty at all in taking up arms against the government if they felt that the government was acting against the spirit of the Constitution. Now it seems the Supreme Court has decided of its own accord that it won't go into questions of governance, that it'll go into only the technicalities. In other words, what I quoted earlier about textual obsession, instead of ensuring the integrity of the democratic process and the need for courts to engage with democracy beyond elections. The elections determine who will form the executive. But merely because an executive has been formed according to the Constitution doesn't mean it is acting within the four corners of the Constitution, or more importantly, in conformity with the spirit of the Constitution. And if the spirit of the Constitution is not going to engage the attention of the courts of India, then it appears that they are playing a mechanistic role rather than a creative role in the governance of our country. So if you have a compromised legislature, a compromised democracy, and a rampant compromised judiciary, and a rampant executive, then you are faced with the leaching of the spirit of constitutionalism. Let me go further. There is the government, by its policies with regard to the minorities, is spreading fear and prejudicing young minds. Should this not be a concern of the courts? There are numerous examples of how the minorities are being targeted. But instead of rising of its own accord, suo moto, to the protection of the minorities, to preventing the spreading of hate against the minorities, we become complicit with the government in maintaining silence or in actively voicing criticism. So these are dangers that exist. There is a lack of respect for democracy, the institutions of democracy, where Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru would invariably attend Parliament on almost every day that the Parliament was in session, and particularly when he was being criticized. Now, the Prime Minister is like the Eid Ka Chand. He occasionally appears. My own first visit to Parliament was as a college student in 1960, when the Nambudripad government had been dismissed by the central government of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And as I sat transfixed in the visitors' gallery, Comrade S.A. Dange mounted a really vicious attack on Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He was not interrupted at all. Nehru sat and listened to him. The Congress benches sat and listened to him. And he ended by saying to Nehru, they're just standing, sitting, there's only the distance between the opposition bench and the treasury bench between them. And he said that you are like Yudhishthira, who said a white lie when he said Ashwathama ataha kunjaraha, and said that just as Yudhishthira's chariot fell to the ground because he had uttered a white lie, so has your chariot fallen to the ground. And the Congress party didn't object. Nehru didn't object. There was no demand that the speaker should remove these words from the record. They're there for anybody who wants to see them. So you need to have respect for Parliament. In the middle of the 1962 war, you remember the first phase began on the 22nd of October, 1962, when the Chinese troops moved across the Namkachu and destroyed our Dhola post and were investing Tawang. At that time, a young parliamentarian who was leading a group of 4 MPs, his name, incidentally, his age was 36. His name was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He called on the Prime Minister, who by coincidence was exactly double his age, 72. And he said that Parliament must be convened to discuss the Chinese debacle. And Jawaharlal Nehru said, yes, of course. And Parliament was convened in early November. And I've looked through the records. There was an incredible record of 180 members of Parliament who spoke in the Lok Sabha. 180 members. Does Parliament run in that way now? Any issue of importance is blocked. It's not encouraged. It's not answered to. So we have such a casual dismissal of opposition demands. There's been, for instance, no response on Adani-ji and crony capitalism. There's been no response on farmers' suicides. There's been no response on the numbers and deaths of COVID migrants. There's been no response on deaths due to lack of hospital beds or oxygen. There are ordinances being passed all the time. Opposition requests are ridden over rough speed. We had a meaningless special session to pass an act that will attract women's votes, but which will not come into operation in 2024. And at the earliest will come into operation in 2029. And because there will be all that confusion over what happens after the 2026 census is taken, it's entirely likely that it will get postponed to 2034. And in any case, it's a regular act of parliament. It could have easily been brought in, for instance, the winter session. But just to highlight what they are doing, they call a special session and then don't announce why they've called it, giving rise to all kinds of speculation, and then produce this damp squib for women's reservation, which they themselves had blocked when the Congress party had a bill passed in Parliament, in the Rajya Sabha, more than a decade ago. So you play with Parliament in this way. And then there are empty gestures, like putting your hands on the ground and kissing the steps of Parliament as the new Prime Minister enters. The Sengol from my constituency, which also is, I think, hardly made an impression. I've just returned from my constituency and nobody seems to know that the Sengol brought from there to Parliament. We have the Prime Minister and not the President inaugurating the new Parliament premises, and the architecture of the new Parliament premises being such that a group of intruders can so easily jump from the gallery into the house and then set off their canisters. It's all very well to say, oh, I attacked Balakot, I attacked surgical strikes. You can't stop these people from jumping. That is why Kumar Ketkar, when we were not recording, was so damning about tomorrow's Parliament session, when the Home Minister is expected to make a statement. So all this means, and then in Parliament itself, as soon as an opposition member starts making a point, immediately the Treasury benches start disrupting the proceedings. So Parliament has become a venue for demonstrations, not for debate and discussions. And that makes the legislature really irrelevant, because important bills are brought before it and passed not after debate, but by voice vote in the middle of pandemonium. All this means that Parliament in 2023 is not the Parliament I entered in 1991. And certainly not the Parliament that I first visited in 1960. So all this makes me feel that there is this emptying of the spirit of constitutionalism. Now, I've spoken for nearly an hour. Should I continue, or would you like to terminate my talk now?
You can continue for 10-15 minutes if you want. Please continue.
Well, I'll try and make it even less, because although I have other points on my agenda, I have I dealt with them, several of them, in my earlier remarks. The worst thing that is happening is the personality cult. मोदी हो तो मुमकिन है, अरे पार्लियामेंट हो तो मुमकिन है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन हो तो मुमकिन है, कानून हो तो मुमकिन है. एक व्यक्ति को लेकर आप कह रहे हैं कि मोदी हो तो मुमकिन है. This is like building up the personality cult of Stalin or of Idi Amin or Mussolini or Hitler or Pol Pot. You want to dazzle, overawe, and numb the opposition by building up one person. And that person makes the claim. It's very ironic that India is going to host, or at least trying to host, the Olympics in 2036 without recognizing the irony of Hitler having hosted it 100 years earlier in 1936. And in 1936, the greatest athlete was a black man from America called Jesse Owens. And Hitler refused to shake hands with Jesse Owens. And after the performance in Ahmedabad for the World Cricket Cup, supposing we have a Pakistani athlete who does extremely well in 1936, whoever is going to be the Prime Minister of India is going to have a problem on his hands as to whether he should be shaking hands with, hugging, kissing the Pakistani athlete who performs very well. So we are in danger. There is misinformation. There are ambivalent statements. There are plain lies. There are huge expenditures on self-projection, responsibility for the figure. But according to him, between the airport and the hotel complex where the Hyatt, where the Taj Hotel and the Marriott Sheraton are located, in that area, during the time of G20, he counted 320 posters with the Prime Minister's face on it. I'd just come back from my constituency, and it was such a relief. There were no posters of Mr. Modi anywhere. Because here in Delhi, every corner I turn, I have to see that face. Is this a democracy? Did you see this face of Jawaharlal Nehru everywhere? There was a time when one congressman said that India is Indira. Indira is India. How he was hit at correctly by the opposition at that time. But now, Modi ho to mumkin hai. This kind of a democracy is incompatible with justice, with the spirit of constitutionalism, and particularly governance by jumla, making promises that there will be 15 lakh rupees for each Indian when I come to power. They're not 15 paise, and all the crooks have gone. They're all sitting in London. And there's a friend of mine, very close friend from college, who runs a chart shop in London. And all these crooks come to her restaurant because they want to eat chaat and dhokla and golgappa and so forth. So it's one thing to govern by making promises that you intend to keep. It's another thing to fight an election by misleading people into thinking you're going to achieve great things and then saying, "Wo to chunav ka jumla tha." So let me say, at the end of the day, that we need particularly to remember that our constitution provides for secularism. The civility of any society is determined by its treatment of its minorities. Now, the minorities in England include the Indians. They have an Indian origin man as their prime minister. You can't fault British democracy. We have in the United States an Indian woman as vice president of that country. You can't fault them. But here, the ruling party doesn't have a single Muslim in its ranks in parliament. There are 200 million Muslims in India. They constitute 14% of our population. Their presence in parliament is under 4%. How can we claim to be a civilized country if we don't give equal space, or at least proportionate space, to our minorities. And then how does this operate? You know all the lynching incidents and changing textbooks and so forth. But let me remind you that one of the big slogans in 2002 was "Isne un logon ko sabak sikhaya hai." In 2002, and Bilkis Bano is rapists are released on the day on which we are supposed to have inaugurated our Amrit Kal. And then there were no Muslim candidates in the state elections of 2017 and 2022 fielded by the BJP. The Muslim community is being divided by talking of Pasmanda and Sufis. The Citizenship Amendment Act is an egregious example of bringing religion into the determination of citizenship. There is an unrelenting cycle of violence and demonization of the minorities. And it is summed up in a slogan that is being popularized by the BJP, which says, "Jab mulle kaate jayenge, to Jai Shri Ram chillayenge." How is this to be allowed? How can you have the equivalent of popes in a Dharma Sansad calling for the genocide of Muslims and continuing to live? Then there's bulldozer politics, so much so that it is brought up as an election symbol. There are provocative religious processions. Mosques are attacked, imams are attacked. There are needless controversies over hijab and public namaz. Then you have dog whistling. कि आप जानते हो कि वो कौन है उनके लिबास को देखकर. And then, so it all, and then pushing the point where somebody walks up to me and says to me in an airport, I don't know him. He says, "Aapki party to Muslim League hai." To look after your minorities is not appeasement. You appease an enemy. So the minute they say Tushtikaran, they're treating the Muslims as an enemy. How can this be reconciled to either the letter or the spirit of Dr. Ambedkar's constitution? I think I made my point. I'll terminate now. Thank you for having given me this opportunity, and I hope I've carried some conviction with at least some of you. Thank you. Jay.
Thank you very much, Iyer Sahab, for this exciting presentation about the manner in which Constitution is being violated in our country.
No,
and the processes in which things are being done.
No, leached, not violated.
Leached. Yeah. Constitution is being leached in this Modi era for the last nine years. Before I invite the illustrious intellectuals and scholars to discuss the things, let me invite my friend and senior comrade, Ravi, to say a few words. Then we will start the discussion. Ravi, please.
Thank you once again, Iyer Sahab, for this very forceful and clear description of what is going on in our country. And thank you once again for accepting our invitation. We are really honored to have you here. While Subhash and Madhvi prepare to invite comments and questions from the audience, which has many luminaries, let me just start by bringing to you our concern about which in various ways we ask almost all our speakers, which is the role of political forces and the people who lead the constitutional institutions, their role in what you have said in leaching of the constitutional democracy has come out very well. And I couldn't agree with you more. And you know things inside out. So we are privileged to listen to you on that part. I would like to bring to you a question to start the discussion about the democracy being undermined by the democratic process itself. Often the fascist forces or undemocratic forces have come to power through democratic process itself. And among many things, two things seem to play a role in this. One is the power of vested interest, financial power, power of capital, if I were to use my favorite terminology. And the other is culture, religion included, in the people at large. And in fact, both these play hand in hand. If financial power would like to manipulate democracy, the culture on the ground becomes very handy. So if you would make some comment about how to plug the loopholes in the democratic process itself so that democracy does not undermine itself. You have been a pioneer of Panchayati Raj, for example, and the culture part, I could give in a lighter way, an example, half joking, but actually it should not be thought of lighter. When I was passing through the countryside of Allahabad and Banaras area a few years ago, and at that time there were elections for the local bodies. And when I passed through many villages, there were large cutouts. These things have now percolated to the local body elections. Large cutout of men, even in those panchayats, which were reserved for women, cutouts for men. And the title was Sarpanch Pati. So the woman who was standing in the election was nowhere to be seen in the posters, and large cutout of the husband of the candidate was there. And they have even invented this term Sarpanch Pati. That brought to my mind there must be some preconditions, social, cultural preconditions for democracy to succeed. That's a very difficult question to answer, because what do you do with the society you are given? What do you do with the playing field itself in which political game of political power, I shouldn't say call game, the process of political power is being played. So you have some thoughts about these two constraints, namely the power in the behind the curtain, the financial power, and the culture that is spread out in the entire society, both of them together making it very difficult for a democracy to become enlightened democracy and democratic values to be preserved through democratic processes. Your thoughts on these, please.
Mr. Chairman, should I answer these questions one by one or allow other people to speak and then give my comments at the end?
Please, you answer the questions. Please respond to the query one by one.
I should respond to the...
Please. Yeah.
Well, actually, Ravi's questions were composites. There were many, many parts to it. But let me begin by first responding to him on the panchayat question. I would recommend that instead of walking or going from Allahabad to Varanasi, you go from Trivandrum to Calicut. You won't find a single poster of the Sarpanch Pati. Or you come to my constituency, and I'll happily walk with you. You won't find a single poster of the Sarpanch Pati. That is because Uttar Pradesh is simply the worst example of Panchayati Raj. And there are much better, merely because Panchayati Raj is being abused in Uttar Pradesh does not mean that it is being abused in the rest of the country. In fact, what I would have liked you to recognize, but I don't blame you because it's not being recognized in the country as a whole, is that we have altogether in India 14 lakh elected women. There are more elected women in India alone than in the rest of the world put together. And yet this massive achievement is being denigrated as being only the election of Sarpanchpatis. That may be true of some backward areas of Uttar Pradesh, including the Prime Minister's constituency. But there are many enlightened parts of India where this doesn't happen. Even in 2007, I had undertaken a survey as the Minister of Panchayati Raj of the place of women in our panchayats. And it revealed that while there are instances of abuse, as women get more and more used to the public space, there is an increasing independence in their action. I was also taught a very useful lesson by a lady panchayat. She was a lady panchayat chairperson in Rajasthan. She must have been about 60 years old. She was answering all my questions in a first-class manner. And then when I asked my next question, some man in the audience got up and answered. So I said कि मैंने इनसे पूछा और आप क्यों जवाब दे रहे हैं? So then I asked my next question, and the chap got up again. So I turned to him, I said कि आप हैं कौन? And everybody in the audience started laughing. And somebody in the audience said, ये तो सरपंच की पत्नी है. So then this lady said to me कि हमारी शादी हुई है पिछले 50 साल से और सारे संकटें जो हैं जिंदगी में उनका सामने हम दोनों ने किया. मैं भी उनका साथ देती हूं और वो भी हमारे साथ देते हैं. तो ये मेरे लिए एक नया काम है. आपका क्या इतराज है कि मेरे पति मुझे मदद करें? And I did not have an answer. Why is it that in Haryana, they suddenly introduced conditions relating to electricity bills being paid, loans not being taken, children not being more than 2, for a woman to even stand for election in a reserved constituency? There was only one reason, that in Haryana, as in the rest of the country, the Panchayat Raj opportunity open for women is being mostly utilized by poor women and scheduled caste women. And the reason for that is that poor women and scheduled caste women have to participate in public in order to earn their living. Whereas wives of upper castes, higher castes, including what are called the OBCs, they tend to be protected by their menfolk in their home. Also, upper caste women tend to go away from the village. Going to them, approaching them, is very difficult because of social factors. So what the electorate does is that they elect poor women. They elect SC women because they can go to their houses to complain. And because the women don't go away to the capital city for shopping. So therefore, to stop poor women from being elected, they brought in conditions which would be imposed upon poor women much more than on rich women. So you must take an integrated view of this. Over this is the reason why nobody is celebrating these 14 lakh women who've been elected, is that it is not matched in parliament and the assemblies. So the elite woman, the drawing room woman, she says, what does it matter to me if my domestic servant is getting elected? I am not getting elected because I don't have reservations. So it's underplayed. But the minute you get how many women, 120, 130, come in to parliament, say, women's empowerment. What is 132 women parliamentarians compared to 14 lakh women in our panchayats, 1 lakh of whom are chairpersons of their institutions? And what does it matter if Uttar Pradesh has this culture of misogyny? When in more enlightened time, I know I'm a South Indian, but it's not because of that I'm saying this. It's simply that I've been all over the country visiting panchayats when I was a minister. That was, of course, some time ago. But I've been following this matter. And there is simply no doubt that there exist exceptional women who, even after reservation says, after 1 term or 2 terms, they get elected, especially if they are scheduled caste, because the community recognizes their ability. There is, fortunately, one of the good things that the Modi government have done is that they have just commissioned a study, which is going to be chaired by a lady who was my senior research officer in the minister's office when I was Minister of Panchayati Raj, Dr. Nupur Tiwari. And that study will soon be available. Is the first study made after I made my report of 2007, which was written up by Professor Nirja Gopal Jayal of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So therefore, I think it is necessary to remove this myth, which is only true of Uttar Pradesh, of the Sarpanch Padi being everything. What is the State Election Commission doing when they see these hoardings that you're talking about? They should have moved. They should have said, you can't put up a hoarding and say ki Sarpanch Pati ko vote dalo. So therefore, there are many, many failings and shortcomings in Panchayati Raj. I have detailed them all in a 5-volume report, which I produced at the Prime Minister's bidding in 2013. But unfortunately, 2013 is 10 years ago, and 1 year of Dr. Manmohan Singh's non-governance, followed by 9 years of BJP governance, and nobody knows that the report exists. So there are ways of correcting it, but there has to be a political will to correct it. And you were earlier asking about what is the role of the opposition in dealing with such questions as secularism. Well, I'm afraid if we don't stick to basic principles and start opportunistically trying to imitate the BJP, we're only going to lose. And Madhya Pradesh is an excellent example of that. There wasn't a temple that Kamal Nath didn't go to. There wasn't, he even went to the extent of saying that Rajiv Gandhi had opened the locks at Ayodhya, boasting, when this is completely untrue. So if we start imitating the BJP and we don't stick to first principles, then of course we're bound to lose. We may even otherwise lose, but at least we lose with honor. We need to go back to Nehru. We need to go back to Gandhi. We need to understand the basics, and we need to articulate the basics. And if we try and compromise, if we try and take up the language of the BJP, then the people will see that we are the B team when there is an A team available. So why should they vote for the B team? They'll vote for the A team, as they did in Madhya Pradesh. So therefore, I think the role of the opposition, especially since it is restricted deliberately by the government in Parliament, is to be out on the streets and openly declare that we are secular. Jawaharlal Nehru said at a rally on Mahatma Gandhi's birthday in the Ram Leela grounds in Delhi, that if any man raises his hand against another in the name of religion, I shall fight him till the last breath of my life, both from within the government and from outside. Which Congress leader is using that language now? Rajiv Gandhi said in Parliament that we are proud of our India because it is a secular country. And if India ceases to be secular, then perhaps India itself should cease to exist. Is there anyone in the Congress who's willing to say that now? So therefore, if we do not remain true to our principles, to our basic philosophy, we cannot fulfill the role you are envisaging for the opposition. And in Parliament, we're not going to be allowed to speak. For the more we speak the truth in Parliament, the less will be the leeway given to the speaker to allow us to speak. So we have to hit the streets and make these statements in the open and not become an imitative party. Thank you.
Before we take up the question in the chat box, I would like to invite Kumar Ketkar Saab to raise his question and comment. Please, Kumar Ketkar Saab, please unmute yourself.
Well, actually, a small question after this narration may not be required, but even then, are the negative features that we witness today? Of course, I am familiar with the positive features which you mentioned, but negative features, can they be reversed? And isn't parliamentary political parties not responsible for this decline of the spirit of the constitutional democracy? Political parties themselves. Finally, a continuation of that question, hasn't majority, forget Hindu, Muslim, hasn't the issue of majority, winning majority has become more popular or more required or more necessary than having the principle of secularism more important? So dividing secularism from democracy, hasn't it created this crisis?
Manisha, please.
The answer lies in returning secularism to democracy, in recognizing that India cannot be a true democracy unless it is a secular country. Because there is no religion in the world that is not represented in India. The Constitution did not take religion into account in determining citizenship, and it guarantees that all citizens, irrespective of their religion, are equal citizens of India. This is the philosophy that was expounded in the run-up to independence and in the immediate aftermath of independence. And every time we've gone back on that, every time we produce a Rudraksha Mala as the answer to the BJP, every time we do a Shilanyas as the answer to the BJP, every time we open a lock as the answer to the BJP, we lose. So it's obvious that if we want to win, if we want to reverse the process, we have to go back to our fundamental values. We have to go back to our fundamental principles. We have to go back to the rationale of our basic philosophy. In the absence of that, the B team cannot defeat the A team. But the B team, if it presents a clear alternative between the tensions generated by promoting communalism and the peace and harmony generated by promoting secularism, unless we present that as a stark alternative, I don't think we can reverse this. So, whether we can reverse it or not, we must reverse it if we are to survive as a secular democracy. And that is what makes it imperative for the Congress in particular and the left forces in general to stand up to the BJP and to refute the thought that Modi ho to mumkin hai. Modi ho to communalism mumkin hai. Modi na ho to secularism mumkin hai. और ऐसा करना चाहिए कि मोदी न रहे। मैं कह रहा हूं कि सरकार में न रहे। ये हो सकता है, संभव है, क्योंकि आखिर वो थे नहीं, लेकिन वो पहुंचे। तो अब जबकि वो पहुंच गए हैं, उनको हटाओ। और उनको हटाने के लिए कई तरीके हैं, लेकिन वो सब बताने के लिए मुझे एक और लेक्चर देना पड़ेगा।
We are with us Professor Muzla Mukherjee. Muzla ji, please, your question or comment, please. Muzla ji.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive talk, taking in everything, all aspects of the not only the times that we are in, but the historical background, giving us a very good overview of the achievements, which I think is very important. I think we can only fight our weaknesses if we are continuously conscious of our achievements. We have to know our strengths to be able to fight our weaknesses. I think for that reason also it's important to keep going back and seeing what are our strengths so that we can derive also our strategies from those strengths. It's not just a question of balancing, both. It's also a question of how we fight the weaknesses, because it is from that that we can derive the way forward. So I think Marie did a wonderful job of putting all that before us. I want to just, as a historian, it's not a question really, but a comment that came to mind when you were talking about especially the tendencies or the traits of the current regime, the dictatorial tendencies, the building up of the image of the leader, all those, the communalism, what is now increasingly being called communal fascism by many commentators, because that's also because I've been recently reading up a lot on the original founders of Hindutva, Golwalkar and Savarkar, and the lot of the more recent research which has come to light on their actual connections with Mussolini, fascism under Mussolini, and with Germany under Hitler. And I think it's important for us. The reason I'm emphasizing this, but I don't think we bring it out enough in the public domain, these origins and the lack of belief that people belonging to this ideological framework have in democracy. In fact, if you look in the writings of ideologues, both past and present, you will never find any clear statements where they proclaim their commitment to democracy, leave alone to secular democracy. I think this is extremely important. If you read Gandhi, Nehru, or anybody of the galaxy of the national leaders, you will immediately find that that is the first commitment they make, is that we are fighting for a democratic India. We are not fighting for a monarchical order, a feudal order, but you do not find this. On the contrary, there is clear statements, and these are, as I said, not publicized enough, where people like Munje, who was, one of the main Mahasabha leaders, who went and met Mussolini, guided the RSS, and especially introduced the whole militaristic element, the emphasis on violence as a value, not just against non-violence, but of emphasizing violence as a necessary part of the political framework, and talks about how you cannot bring these changes about which they want without a dictator. It's said in very, very clear terms, but they are not challenged on these grounds publicly. I think we need to do that. Okay, they're not challenged on the whole complicity in the Gandhi assassination. They're let off all the time by arguments between whether Godse remained a member of the RSS or not. That's not the point. condemned it? When have you condemned it? What do you condemn it now? I mean, there are so many of such things where, when we are talking about the ideological battle which has to be fought, there is also, I'm just pointing to, there's so much in history as well, in their history, which can be very effectively made part of the ideological counter narrative. So I think I just wanted to emphasize this, and I just, since I'm on it half a minute more, I was also not aware of this. I became aware of this recently because of what I read. It's very interesting that initially they take their model as Italian fascism and Mussolini. But as Hitler becomes more and more extreme and the anti-Jewish element in Nazism becomes very prominent, and in fact, some of the worst excesses against the Jews happen, the Hindu Mahasabha under Savarkar and with all these leaders, they become more and more pro-Hitler and more pro-Nazi. So there's a progression also from Italian fascism as a model to German Nazism as a model. And this is again fascinating. Apart from the fact, of course, that they happily supported the British during the Second World War when the Congress was fighting the Quit India movement. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was sitting as a minister, etc., etc. All those facts are very well known. I don't want to go back to those, but I thought I'll just bring this to your attention. Thank you.
I completely agree that within the ideological battle requires us to go back in history to what the mentors of Mr. Modi wrote and said. And that includes the tremendously close connection of Mussolini with the RSS, and later of both the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha with Adolf Hitler. In fact, in an article which has been circulated by me today, I have quoted Savarkar as saying that we will be even more happy than the Jews if they get their Israel, their homeland. So this close connection between Zionism and Hindutva also needs to be foregrounded. And unfortunately, we're not even talking about our manifesto, let alone the history of the Congress. So I do think that inputs provided by people like Mridula and her husband are essential in the ideological struggle against the BJP. But unfortunately, my party does not appear to be engaging in logical struggle should be the basis of our total struggle.
I will request now our comrade Madhvi to take up questions in the chat box. Madhvi, please.
Thank you, Subhashji. And thank you, Manishankar Iyer, sir, for a deeply engrossing talk on the state of democracy in contemporary India. It was a thought-provoking talk. There are several questions in the chat box. I would like to read one after the other. The first question is raised by Deependra Baghel. He says, it seems that efficacy of Hindutva to leach out democratic spirit from the constitution has already been established. We are witnessing the erosion of the pillars of democracy. What could be the remedy of this rampant malady? How do you see the future and where to it is heralding? And he continues, there seems to be a pathology of revenge and bounce back embedded in the set of narratives of Hindutva. And it seems that this success is on the rise in the cow belt of Hindi-speaking belt. How do these narratives that cater to inherent sadism could be resisted?
Well, I'd like to answer by saying that Mr. Modi received only 31% approval in the election of 2014, and it rose to 37% in 2019. Therefore, majorities of dissent have not supported the Hindutva view. Secondly, while the rise of Hindutva in 1947 could perhaps be understood in terms of the horrors of partition, the fact is that India and Indians chose secularism rather than we said, no, we are a secular country, the way through till 1999, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee received a majority. So it would appear that civilizationally, historically, and even in contemporary times, the bulk of Indians are secular. They don't believe in the narrow views of the Hindutva people. But because our politics has become so divisive on the left front and among liberals, our votes are not counting. I'm hoping the India Alliance will genuinely be able to bring together all the non-BJP forces, or at least a majority of them, or at least some of them, to be able to take on the BJP machine. And if we do, victory is ours. That's simple. Mathematics will work and the chemistry will work. But if the meeting on the 19th of December, that's 2 days from today, does not lead to the integration of the India Alliance, then we're in deep trouble. But if it does lead to the integration, then the BJP is in deep trouble. So I am full of hope that India will remain true to itself, which means true to its secular traditions, and not fall for this aberration called Hindutva.
So Aditya Mukherjee, आप बात रखेंगे? Aditya, please. Please unmute yourself, please.
As usual, we had a brilliant presentation from Mani Saab, and comprehensive, brave, self-critical, which is very rare these days. I just want to add to one point he made in support of what he said, that we are not fighting for our basic values. You analyze the recent elections. In no election did the Congress put forward its own values as the counterpoint to the BJP values. In other words, we are not addressing the elephant in the room. Everybody says communalism is the main issue, fascism is the main issue, but in the election you're talking about everything else but fascism and communalism. So it is amazing. And since he said, let's go back to Gandhi and Nehru, I want to, I'm sure Mani Saab has seen this earlier, but refer to a speech that Nehru gives after the first election. He says, what are the lessons from this election? And as you know, that the first election was the only election fought in independent India, which was on the issue of secularism versus communalism. Do we want a secular India, or do we want a Hindu Rashtra, a mirror image of Muslim Pakistan? That was the issue, almost a referendum, right? So after that election, which obviously the Congress, as you know, won massively, what does Nehru say? He makes 3 points, and I thought they are so relevant today that I want to share them with you. First, he says, I'm very glad that we have seen that we can fight communalism and win. And he's saying this, mind you, after the Holocaust-like situation, after the partition, 47 to 50, I mean, is 46 to 50 is a very bad period in terms of the communal temperature. So he's saying that by winning this election, we show that you can fight communalism. Second lesson, he says, is that we cannot, therefore, compromise with communalism. That we do not need to compromise, we do not need to accommodate, we can fight. And if only we fight, we will win. This is the second lesson. The third lesson, which I think is extremely important, and a lesson we forgot in 2004 when we came to power, is what Nehru says. He says that please, from this election, because we have won, don't for a moment come to the conclusion that the fight is over. We have only won the election. But the poison in the minds of the people that has been put in, he said, will take a very long time to undo. We spent 10 years from 2004 to 2014 doing damn all in undoing the poison that was among the people. We did everything else. We did a lot of good things, but we did not fight this battle. I think it's a good idea to go back to Nehru. And thank you for saying this, that we do believe that we need to go back to Gandhi and Nehru to fight this evil that has overtaken our country in almost a similar manner as it did in the 1940s and 50s. Thank you.
My comment on that is, just look at the Congress Working Committee that has been recently recomposed. There's 60 people in it. I'm not. Because I keep asking that go back to Gandhi and Nehru. That is the crux of the problem.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Next.
Fundamentalists.
I know. The word secular fundamentalism was made for you as an abuse.
We are with us, Professor.
No, I went to, the last campaign I did for the Congress was, I think it was in Gujarat in, I think, 2011 or so. And the president of the Congress there said to me with horror, कि आपने मोदी जी का नाम लिया? तो I said, आप उनके खिलाफ लड़ नहीं रहे हो क्या? But they have so surrendered themselves. I introduced somebody as बहुत secular आदमी है. He says, वो शब्द आप इस्तेमाल न करें. So if the Congress is not true to its own values, how can we expect the BJP to be true to Congress values?
Quite.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Very well put.
Well said.
Subhash, can I, coming in second time is not proper, but the way the discussion is happening, it is so exciting, and especially along with Mani Sahab, Mridula ji and Adit Sahab have spoken. My concern is that we should not end up criticizing one force that has the best chance of fighting this monster. Yes, I agree with all three of you about fundamental values to which Congress should be true to. But that is why probably I did not, I did damage to my own question by referring to panchayat elections in UP. That was not my point, to which Mani Sahab, clearly, he pointed out, the positive aspects of that. My point is the following, that as democracy has deepened in the Indian society, the fault lines inside the society have become politically active. So, yes, we should stick to secular values. Congress should stick to secular values, even though Congress is not one. Half of RSS is in Congress, has been in Congress traditionally. But beyond sticking to fundamental values, how do you deal with the social, cultural, civilizational reality of India, which democracy has activated, as democracy has deepened? So it is easy to criticize political forces that they are not true to the fundamental values, but the barriers they encounter in the society that we are given, that we cannot do nothing to the society in the short run. The society is given, and yet we have to find some strategy, some way. We have to underline certain aspects so that somebody is, you can mute somebody's thing is open. I'm sorry to, belabor the point, but my point is not about whether there have been political forces which are really true to fundamental values. There may have been compromises and so on. But I would like the learned people in this audience to comment on the barriers that our society itself presents to democratic processes. That was my point in the first time I asked the question. And we are getting back to faults or drawbacks of political forces, but we are not commenting on how to deal with the civilizational, social, cultural barriers that present themselves to democratic process.
May I respond?
Please. Yes, Abab.
May I respond?
Yes. Please go ahead. Yes, Abab.
I mean, I think Ravi sounds like Winston Churchill. Because these are precisely the reasons why they weren't ready to give us democracy. They saw civilizational, societal, caste, religion as reasons to provide a civilizational mission to make us all Macaulay ki aulad. Whereas Gandhi, Nehru, and other members of the Congress said, we want to have universal franchise, that a person does not have to be shut out because he's a Hindu or because he's a Hindu extremist. But if you give everyone the opportunity of expressing themselves politically, especially in the ballot box, extreme opinions will not prevail. We were the first country in the world to have adult franchise written into our constitution before we held an election. We were the first country in the world to introduce affirmative action for our weakest sections and historically disadvantaged sections before we had our first election. And for close on 65 years, there was no problem. Even Mr. Vajpayee, I have described as the last congressman. This has come in only in 2014. And I don't think it represents a civilizational truth. I invite you, instead of walking or going from Allahabad to Varanasi, to kindly walk from, I'll now begin with Patna, then you go to Calcutta, then you go to Bhubaneswar, then you go to or Vizag, then you go to Hyderabad, then you go to Bangalore, then you go to Trivandrum, then you go to Chennai, incidentally through my constituency. And you won't find any of this rubbish that you encounter between Varanasi and wherever it was, Allahabad. This is a North Indian aberration. But the population here is so large because they haven't adopted population growth that I'm told that the guess is that North India's population is 63% more than the last figure, whereas South India's population is 6% more. Now, which is the civilizational truth? Is it Udayanidhi Maran saying that we don't believe in the Sanatana Dharma? Or is our civilizational truth that we are all Sanatanis? So these distortions in our history, in our philosophy, the Rigveda says, and that's quoted by Nehru, who created all this? And the answer given is, only he knows. And then comes the next line, which says that perhaps even he knows not. Skepticism is our civilizational heritage, not these dogmatic certainties. And that, I think, is what we need to understand. Otherwise, we'll be fighting false enemies. Kamal Nath fought the wrong enemy when he thought that he had to imitate the BJP in order to become chief minister. And Madhya Pradesh has proved that if we don't present an alternative, they'll go for the A team. Why do you want to imitate them? You have to give an alternative view. And fortunately, our alternative view is based on 5,000 years of recorded history. Theirs is not. Theirs is a complete distortion of 700 years of a Muslim king being on the throne of Delhi. It is under, please remember, please note this. It was under the Delhi Sultanate of Qutbuddin Aibak that the Bhakti movement started. The Bhakti movement came to a climax under Aurangzeb when Guru Gobind Singh proclaimed himself the last of the Gurus. This Bhakti movement, which is the essence of Hinduism as it is understood today, was entirely conceived and propagated during Muslim rule in India. Will the BJP accept this? What is the distortion they do? So I would request you, Ravi, to please not fall into their trap. They have laid a trap by claiming that civilizationally, societally, philosophically, there are barriers in Indian society to a true democracy, and that we are becoming a true democracy now when some Uttar Pradesh walas are claiming that we have to have the reclamation of the Ram Janmabhoomi, the Krishna Janmabhoomi, the Gyan Vapi Masjid. There, the Gyan Vapi Masjid has existed now since the time of Aurangzeb. It came because a Nepali princess whom he was escorting was raped in the Gyan Vapi temple. And so in fury, Aurangzeb broke the temple. But ever since then, in other words, for the last 400 years, you can't sound the azan in the mosque without it being heard in the temple. And you can't ring the temples in the mosque, you can't ring the bells in the temple without it reaching the mosque. There's been complete harmony. So why is it being disturbed now? It's being disturbed because these people are not true to India's civilization. They're not true to India's society. They're only true to their wretched, narrow-minded philosophy that is based on hatred. So let's please not fall into this trap of saying that there are major... What the problem is really in the secular mind. We've got frightened, and if we remain frightened, we'll remain at 50 seats. If we stand up for what we believe in, then even if we get only 50 seats, at least we would be true to ourselves. But at the moment, to be untrue to yourself and end up with 44 seats is not the answer to the BJP.
Madhvi, please take a question in the chat box. Madhvi. Madhvi, will you please take up the question in the chat box?
Yes, please. Just a moment. I would like to present two questions which are similar in spirit. One is from Aloysius Irudayam. He says, Honorable Manishankar Iyer, thanks for your illuminating speech. I do share with you in your anguish that not only the Constitution, but also the democratic institutions are getting leached gradually. So also the media and the civil society organizations, as you have rightly indicated. In this context, I still see the civil society having a tremendous role to play to make democracy vibrant. From your vast experience, what concrete suggestions would you like to offer civil society to make the constitutional democracy vibrant? And I would like to take up another question, which is similar in spirit, please.
Civil society has to stand up to these authoritarian, majoritarian positions. And I'm glad to say that within my family, they are standing up. So therefore, if you acquiesce in being a victim, then you are part of the oppressor. You have to stand up for what you believe in. And if only the political parties of the left and the liberal side stand up to these people, that we will be able to defeat them. And I guarantee you that if the India alliance is actually put together sensibly, then we have a very good chance of at least stopping the BJP juggernaut, even if not of eliminating it. And that is what we should be aiming at. We must prevent them from having a 2/3 majority. That should be the first goal. The second goal should be to reduce their majority. But our first goal must be to stop them from being able to change our constitution. So at least that much we achieve. If you agree on 200 seats, if you agree on 300 seats, you achieve your second goal. You agree on 400 seats, they get defeated. Please remember that they have never had more. It is minoritism in the BJP that is translating into majoritarianism in Uttar Pradesh. But been in the majority of the country. And I'm using this language, I've never used it in the past. I find the South to be more enlightened. I find parts of the West, Maharashtra, for instance, to be more enlightened. I find the North to be much more enlightened. Punjab, Himachal, Kashmir. None of these is with them. It's all the result of a lack of family planning in Uttar Pradesh. That is where 80 seats are taken by the BJP. Now, if we can only come to a sensible arrangement with Akhilesh Yadav particularly, and if possible with Mayawati, they'll be ousted from at least half those 80 seats. And that will reduce them. So don't despair. This is not the moment to become an acquiescent companion of the BJP. This is the moment to stand up to them and say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And you've been wrong since the time of Savarkar and since the time of Golwalkar. You are all the aulad. We may be Macaulay ki aulad, but you are the aulad of Mussolini and Hitler. Do we have the guts to say that? Do we have the guts to say that Savarkar is the other side of the coin on which Jinnah is the face? After all, Jinnah predicted that we would become a Hindu country. And his main collaborator is Mr. Modi, who's Hinduizing this country. But we don't speak all this because Sonia Gandhi said, what did she say? Maut ka saudagar. We now withdrawn that. And I have been totally marginalized because I said he was a neech kisam ka aadmi. Why are we falling in with the BJP? Why don't we oppose them? Did Mahatma Gandhi compromise with the English, despite his admiration for many things English? So, I'm quite ready to be friends with Mr. Modi, but I'll never accept that his philosophy is the right one.
We have with us S.R. Darapuri Saab. He has raised a question in the chat box. I will request him to unmute himself and raise the question. Darapuri Saab. आप बात करेंगे, बताएंगे आप? आपने चैट बॉक्स में कुछ क्वेश्चन रखा था, आप सुब्रत राजू भी हम लोग साथ हैं. अभी मैं उनको भी इनवाइट करना है, उन्होंने हैंड रेज किया है, लेकिन क्योंकि दारापुरी साहब ने पहले ही हाथ खड़ा, मतलब क्वेश्चन चैट बॉक्स में डाला था, और तो आप माधवी दारापुरी साहब आप बोलेंगे? आवाज नहीं आ रही आपकी, आवाज नहीं आ रही, बिल्कुल नहीं. Madhvi, can you please read his question? Madhvi.
Okay. Just a moment. Why Congress is so much afraid of pursuing secularism is his question.
I repeatedly given the answer to this question. I don't think I have anything to add.
Okay.
I've explained to you. You see, the Congress has always had a Hindu wing. It was represented in the freedom movement by Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, Lala Lajpat Rai, and others. But the mainstream of the Congress, the main ideology, was articulated by Mahatma Gandhi in terms of Hindu-Muslim unity and by Jawaharlal Nehru in terms of secularism as the philosophy of the state. Now, are we ready to stand up for Gandhi and Nehru? For God's sake, I'm not asking you to stand up for Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. I'm saying stand up for Gandhi and Nehru. Is that a difficult thing for the Congress to do?
We are with Subrat Raju also. Subrat, please unmute yourself.
Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, in fact, for everything you said, Mr. Iyer. And I wanted to thank you. I agreed with you completely in what you said, that it's very important to recognize, syncretism in Indian culture. And it's very important not to allow the BJP, exactly as you said, to define Indian culture. And we must, look at the syncretic and progressive traditions, and we must be principled and we must not compromise. I completely agree with you on all of that. I only wanted to suggest that, we should also extend that to Uttar Pradesh. I worry about, we should be cautious also about being condescending to traditions in UP. In fact, exactly as you said, in UP itself, there are very rich syncretic traditions going back, thousands of years. And as you said about the rest of India, Uttar Pradesh also has rejected, communal politics for many years. In fact, I only lived there for 4 years, and in those 4 years, there was no hint of the communal politics that is now dominant. And issues of population control are, often about issues of class and women's empowerment and so on. So I agree with you on everything you said. I just would wish that you would also extend that hopeful attitude also to Uttar Pradesh, rather than phrasing it as a dichotomous thing. And of course, we recognize there is a problem currently. That's where the BJP's base is. And that's where we need to work hard. But I worry a little bit if we turn it into a North versus South issue. And that might not be in keeping with the rest of our progressive outlook. That's just a small comment.
Yeah, but I did not raise the North-South issue. It was raised by Ravi when he said that walking from Allahabad to Varanasi, he found that there were these hoardings of Sarpanch Patis. So I wanted to point out that Hinduism is as much the majority religion of the rest of India as it is of Uttar Pradesh. But somehow this poison of Hindutva, which is not Hinduism, has taken root in UP in a way in which it hasn't taken root anywhere else. But because they have this population, they have 80 seats in the parliament. By winning UP, you win Delhi. And that the danger lies. And if you push things, this Sanatana Dharma question, for instance, nobody in Tamil Nadu objects to Maran's, but it's made it into a big issue. Similarly, we still don't have the All India Radio News broadcast in Tamil Nadu in Hindi. At that time, the news comes on. So, cannot take the periphery to the mainland. And that is what is happening now. Having divided the country on religious grounds, there is now an attempt being made to divide it on regional grounds based upon the imposition of a uniform culture on a country world. We need our unity in diversity. So unless the diversity is respected, the unity is in danger. It's now 2 hours since we started. Are we continuing? because everybody else, the whole family, has gathered for dinner, and I'm taking up time and space.
Okay. I will take the last question from Professor Ramakrishna. Shekhar Ramakrishna. Shekhar is there with us. Shekhar.
Yeah, sure.
I have to apologize. I maybe to make it easier for the speaker. I don't have any questions. I learned a lot, and among other things, expressions like Eid ka Chand, which I didn't know, and so I'm very appreciative. And it is a tension what Mr. Manishankar Iyer is saying, and importance of stressing secularism on the part of Congress Party. And but at the same time, I do appreciate Ravi's point that winning the election is the most important thing. So yeah. So thank you so much. This is a great program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manisa, for accepting our invite and making a thought-provoking presentation. And we'll the idea to take up the ideological battle, the idea to take up revisit Nehruvian legacy and take it up again is today very important. The demonic forces, the malignant forces which are ruling India, for them, someone like Nehru or Nehru's politics needs to be revived. So thank you very much for bringing those points once again. Thank you all for joining this discussion.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Jai Hind.